So another tool that is really useful for retrieval practice is Quizziz. So Quizziz is a quizzing tool that's used to provide cued recall to pupils. It used to be multiple choice, but it now has short answer options as well. And before you ask, I think personally that this is better than Kahoot, and I would choose it over Kahoot any day of the week. And hopefully I'll explain a bit about why as we go through this video. So when you first sign into Quizziz, which is a website, your page should look something like this. It takes you straight to the Explore section. And if you go to Explore, you can search by topic and find quizzes that you want to steal or you want to use and edit. So just like with Quizlet, sharing and reducing workload is a really excellent feature. So let's find something that we want. So let's say we are going to look at stories. And we've got some different options here. Okay, so let's say that I quite like this quiz that's on the right hand side here. And what I can do with this is I can add questions from this to a quiz that I'm making at the bottom. So I can preview a quiz that I'm making myself, or I can choose at the top to add all content here. If I do that, it's going to take all 11 questions and it's going to teleport them into a quiz for me. So I can go through all of these and steal questions from each quiz that I want to, if I find good ones. And at the bottom, I can then either tap preview or open an editor or save quiz. I'm going to open an editor because what I'd like to do here is I'd like to edit some of these questions because I'm not 100% sure on some of the wording, or maybe I want to add some extra pictures or add some other questions into my quiz as well. So I can rename this quiz and put in any new questions I want and edit the ones that are there. On the right hand side, you can also see that if I have questions already on a spreadsheet or a Google form or a different platform, I can also import those questions as well, which is a really handy feature that will hopefully save you time. Now you can include things like images, equations, audio for students with learning difficulties or for English as additional language, but with some questions you'll see that they'll have these little lightning bolt next to them. That means that they are a super feature. So the free ones are multiple choice, fill in the blank, draw, open-ended and poll, whereas matching, reordering, drag and drop, video and audio responses are all paid. Now, when you are designing quizzes, we need to think carefully about that desirable difficulty element and not making the questions too easy. Also, in terms of wording, you need to think about different ways of changing the wording or asking the same things in different ways. Otherwise, the pupils are just learning how to answer that particular question, which is not how exams work. So to do this, you can use the duplicating feature. So say I want to take a question and I want to edit it a little bit, ask it in a different way. Beside the edit button, there is the 2 pieces of paper. If I tap that, that's going to duplicate the question, and then I can change the wording of it and edit it. So basically what this means is the duplicating feature will help me to make sure that I'm reducing my workload. So it's really useful for either quizzes or for individual questions. So I can actually duplicate an entire quiz if I wanted to and change the wording in that as well. And that teleporting feature I showed you already, which is basically stealing and editing a question from either one of your own quizzes or from someone else's quiz that's already on the Explore feature. They are both really good features for time saving. Now, a little tip when you are creating a multiple choice question. You need to make sure that you always use common misconceptions as plausible distractors when you're making a multiple choice question. You shouldn't make it too easy for students to answer questions and therefore get a false sense of security. This is not something that I'm particularly good at. I know it takes a long time, but it is worthwhile. So one activity I think is really useful is if you maybe pair up with others in your own department or pair up just with a colleague, and if you pair up with them and write a question. So one person writes 4 multiple choice answer options to a particular question, swaps it with someone else, and they have to write 4 answers as well without looking at the other person's before they're allowed to look at their partners. And then they can look at, did they write the same ones? Why did they write the same ones? Were there any good distractors that were in there? Maybe create a question that combines the best parts of both, and that would be my ideal way of writing these quizzes or writing these tests. But if you're doing it as a department, you could always have someone writing a quizzes for certain topics, and then when other ones use them with their classes, they might pick up any pitfalls or be able to edit or duplicate to create new versions of those questions while they try them out. So something else I found really useful that's in the literature is when you're designing questions, could anyone answer that question with no subject knowledge? If it's so obvious that at least 2 or 3 of those answers are wrong, then you need to think to yourself, is that a useful question? And that'll tell you if it's not designed well enough. My final tip for creating a quiz is you should never use filler questions. They become harmful. There's a phenomenon called retrieval-induced forgetting, which suggests that forgetting some items is in part a consequence of remembering other items. Therefore, if a student is wasting retrieval energy trying to recall the person's name who spoke in a video that you showed in that lesson earlier, that might be detrimental to the information you actually want them to be able to recall and remember in the longer term. Now, just on the side of that, that was how to explore and edit quizzes. You can also create them from scratch by tapping the create button on the left-hand side, and you can choose to either make a quiz or a lesson, and you can import now from Google Slides and Google Forms as well. It takes you to a similar kind of page that I had before, and you can use the search bar, as I said at the top, to basically search your own library and also the community library for question types that you would like to teleport in. So that makes it nice and simple. Now, once you have your quiz, you're going to want to set your quiz. So here you can see on the left-hand side, this is all my department's quizzes under each topic. Now, if I go to set the quiz, let's say, for example, I want to set this quiz on gene expression. Okay, so I've got my questions all finished already there. There's a few different options with this. So I'm just going to continue editing and save this for now. There we go. And just refresh my page. Okay, so this is now ready to go. I've saved my quiz after I created it. It's there. Now, you have the option here to either start a live quiz or you can assign for homework. And there's actually a paper mode that they've added in now as well. So there's the option to assign the quiz for homework or asynchronously to use by pupils. If you do this, you can then set the deadline for this project, and you can also choose some of the different features at the bottom, so you can decide whether you want them to have a leaderboard, and basically it's really simple. You then just tap assign and then just copy the code and stick it onto whatever learning platform that you use, whether that's Teams or Google Classroom. You can also do the quiz live, which is how I use it quite a lot. So just like Kahoot, but there's 2 kind of options here when you look on the left and you tap start a live quiz. The options are you can either do instructor paced, where you can go through the questions together with the class one at a time. This is the most like Kahoot, and you just basically wait till everyone's answered, go over the answer, go on to the next one. But there's also a mode that is live that lets students answer questions at their own pace, which I find is much better, which we can have a wee look at just now. So if I just tap on Classic, I can then decide how I want it to look. Do I want it to be a team game? Do I want it to just be each participant answers at their own pace? Or do I want it to be more like a test, which you do need a login for, and where there's no kind of other frills and stuff around it? Now, if I just go for classic and I go down, I can change how many attempts that these people can have. I can have it generate nicknames for them rather than them putting in their own. I can get it to either show answers during the activity or not, and I can also decide if I want it to release the marking scheme after. Redemption questions are whether you want them to be able to try questions again that you got wrong, and there's things like power-ups and stuff as well that you can put in place too. Now, as I said, there's lots of advanced settings there. It's really useful if you really want it to be truly low stakes, but you also want it to replicate the testing environment as much as possible. So here you can get rid of that competitive nature by removing that leaderboard, removing the timer, removing the memes. And if you do that, what that means is it's a bit more like a kind of lower stakes assessment, but also it's purposeful. So the thing that I always get annoyed about with things like Kahoot is, why should you get more points for answering quickly? That's the biggest issue I have with it. we don't want kids to do that in the exams. We don't want them to rush through it. We often see kids sitting at the end of exams after quite a while just doing nothing, and we get annoyed at them for not doing more or taking their time. So I feel like we shouldn't reinforce that in class as well. So you can turn those things off or keep them on if you'd like to, but the one I would definitely keep on down here is the option to shuffle the answers and shuffle the questions. What this means is if pupils are sitting next to one another, they can't cheat. They can't look over their shoulder at the person next to them who's doing the same question as them and copy where their answer is, because all of their questions are going to be in completely different orders, and so are their answer options as well. After you set all of your settings, you just tap continue, and that will give you the QR code and the link that you can show to pupils, or the code to get them to join if you just want them to go through the website. Once you have finished your quiz, you'll see that there's no marking by the teacher required, and Quizziz also gives you some really nice outputs. So if your class has just done a quiz and you want to look at the reports, you tap reports on the left-hand side, and this will basically tell you all the reports you've done. On the left-hand side, whether you've done them live or you've set them as homework, it'll tell you how many pupils have taken part, and it'll tell you the class accuracy. Now, the accuracy is really, really useful because remember, you'll have heard me speak about that kind of Goldilocks sweet spot before. You want them to be getting, as a class, roughly about 80% of your questions correct. If they're not, it might be showing that you need to reteach some parts of the course, or it might show that if it's too low, your questions might be too hard. If it's too high, you're maybe not putting enough distractors in there. So what I'm going to do is show you the outputs that this gives. So I'm going to go way back to the first quiz that I ever set on here from a higher class 3 years ago. And on here you can see the accuracy is not there, but that's because this feature was brought in a little bit later. It tells me how many questions there were, so I was quite mean, gave my class 94 questions, and it tells you how many people attempted it. Now, the participants you can go into individually, and you can look at their score, look at how many they got correct, how many they got incorrect, which is quite useful. However, what I find more useful is by going into the question tab, I can either look at the questions in order, or I can sort by accuracy, and this is really handy. So I can now see at the top all of the questions that my class did the best on, and I can scroll right down to the one that they found the hardest, and I can expand this and I can go through this with my class and look at their answers and talk about maybe why they chose those other options as well. Another thing that's really useful here is the overview. So the overview gives me all of their names, and I can scroll along and look at exactly what questions maybe the class did slightly worse on. So here I can look and I can see, well, maybe for these questions from question 36 onwards, my class are only getting about 74% accuracy on it. So I maybe need to go back over those things. Now, these are really handy. They always get saved on the Quizziz report section. But if you want to, you can download the report by tapping the button on the right-hand side, and that downloads it as a really nice spreadsheet as well. So you get really good output, really good information to inform your teaching and your next steps within this section. You can check that class average as it's automatically calculated and think about that retrieval difficulty. And as I said, you have that option to look at the toughest questions or the easiest questions really, really simply. Finally, we need to remember it's important to repeat quizzes, not just to do them as one-offs. That's really important because this allows you to do this so easily. Because how often do we, if we're asking a class questions and we're just doing it out of the top of our heads, how often do we remember to ask that exact same question again later? It's something that's really, really important for retrieval strength, making them do questions over and over again, trying to edit them or change them slightly each time if you can, but it's really important that they get multiple times to practice this, and it's spaced out because spaced practice is also one of those really, really efficient and useful methods of learning as well. So that is a quick overview of Quizziz. As I said, a really, really excellent retrieval tool that you can use in your classroom and that you can get started with today using all of those banks that have already been created. I hope that's been useful.